Strong words tonight from Andy, who's all worked up over the war in Iraq.
I'm not really clear about how much $1 billion is, but the United States, our United States, is spending $5.6 billion a month fighting this war in Iraq that we never should have gotten into. We still have 139,000 soldiers in Iraq today. Almost 2,000 Americans have died there. For what? Now we have the hurricanes to pay for. One way our government pays for a lot of things is by borrowing from countries like China. Another way the government is planning to pay for the war and the hurricane damage is by cutting spending for things like Medicare prescriptions, highway construction, farm payments, Amtrak, National Public Radio, loans to graduate students. Do these sound like things you'd like to cut back on to pay for Iraq? I'll tell you where we ought to start saving, on our bloated military establishment. We're paying for weapons we'll never use. No other country spends the kind of money we spend on our military. Last year, Japan spent $42 billion. Italy spent $28 billion. Russia spent only $19 billion. The United States spent $455 billion. We have 8,000 tanks, for example. One Abrams tank costs 150 times as much as a Ford station wagon. We have more than 10,000 nuclear weapons, enough to destroy all of mankind. We're spending $200 million a year on bullets alone. It's a lot of target practice. We have 1,155,000 enlisted men and women and 225,000 officers. One officer to tell every 5 enlisted soldier what to do. We have 40,000 colonels alone and 870 generals. We had a great commander in World War II, Dwight Eisenhower. He became president, and on leaving the White House in 1961, he said this:
"We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist."
Well, Ike was right. That's just what's happened.
Long summer of 2011 is really a significant moment. 10th anniversary of 9/11, coming on 10 years in Afghanistan, approaching what may be an end to U.S. military involvement in Iraq, and the beginning of a drawdown in Afghanistan. What did it all cost?
After 10 years of war, it really is imperative that we understand how much the American people and the people of Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan have been paying for these wars, and the cost is staggering. Their present costs, their future costs, their human costs and their financial costs, their social costs.
We have borrowed virtually all of the money that has been used to pay for the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts. And that has been very expensive, adding at least $1.5 trillion to our national debt.
Millions of people have been displaced, and many more have suffered and died because of lack of access to clean drinking water, because they're malnourished, because they can't get to healthcare facilities.
There's a major war going on in Pakistan. There have been tens of thousands of people killed and several million refugees created.
In Afghanistan, at least 12,000 to 14,000 civilians have died. In Iraq, at least 125,000 civilians have been killed. And in Pakistan, about 35,000 people have died.
Taking care of our veterans over the next 20, 30, 40 years. That cost alone will add another $600 billion to $1 trillion.
Many of the costs of the war are undercounted, they're uncounted, in some cases even suppressed. And it makes it imperative that we try and put this together to get a full sense of what the war has cost us. A lot of Americans know that 6,000 of our young men and women have died in uniform in the war, but very few people know that the scale of human death and wounding has been much vaster, both in the military and in the civilian sectors, and that the costs have been borne unevenly. The military families, contractor families, the people of Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, of course, have borne a tremendous cost.
It's hard to convey the cost in lives over there because of these wars, and the psychological toll and the physical toll for the survivors who've lost limbs, who have been stunted by malnourishment, and have suffered diseases they would otherwise not have gotten. So it's, very tough to talk about it, but we have to.
When the battles have been fought, what kinds of destruction is left behind? What refugee flows? What destruction of housing? What kinds of new family structures get set up when women are widowed? And what kinds of challenges, poverty, often ensue for families? And to take responsibility for that, to say this is what that choice to go to war resulted in. It resulted in these costs.
So the overall cost of taking 2 million young people and bringing them into the line of fire in conflicts which have had really no front lines, so they've had a very, very large number of injuries relative to fatalities. The cost of this is borne by many, many different groups in our society.
Wars, in a sense, are never over when they're over. They go on for decades, and some of the peak costs for this war will be incurred 40 years from now as veterans age into some of the most difficult years for dealing with their disability and injuries from the war.
At this point, I think the questions that we should be asking are, if not for the decision to invade Iraq in particular, would we still be mired in Afghanistan? Would oil prices be where they are? Would the national debt be as high as it is? Would the financial crisis have been as severe as it was? And I think arguably the answer to all four of those questions is no.
One of the things that we have to understand is what the trade-offs were. What kinds of job creation, what kinds of improvements in our infrastructure, and what kind of greening of the American economy could have occurred with all of the funds and all of the human labor that have instead gone into waging the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and Pakistan.
There is an immense and urgent requirement to learn from the experience of the past decade and to try to ensure that we don't make the same mistakes all over again.
So we're at a decision point, I think, in 2011. We're at the point when we can decide to draw down more quickly or draw down more slowly in Afghanistan. We can decide whether or not to keep funding the Pakistani military and Frontier Corps. We can decide how we want to structure repayment of the borrowing for these wars. But there are a lot of choices that we could make right now that will either increase or decrease the human and the financial costs of the conflicts that we began after 9/11.
There's actually a very clear connection between the war, which has been a disaster, and our economy, which has been a disaster. The most clear link is the fact that the war, 2003, led to an increase in the price of oil. Futures markets, which look at the demands and supplies going forward, saw that there was going to be an increase in the demand for oil from China, India, even the United States. But they thought that there was going to be an increasing supply that was concomitant with that increase in the demand, particularly from the Middle East, which is the low-cost provider. And so they forecast that the price of oil would remain around $25 a barrel for the next 10 years. Well, the war upset that equation.
We've paid a huge price for George Bush here in the last, month. I mean, we paid a huge price for him for 8 years, but in the last month in particular, we've paid a huge price for having a president who really has behaved like a troll, who comes out of the White House every 4 or 5 days, tells us it's okay, and then disappears into the White House. And the reason we've paid a price is because we haven't had a president who could sit down calmly and clearly and vividly explain to Americans what is the problem we're in and what is the solution. And that's why we had all this crazy, messy politics with the House of Representatives rejecting the bailout one day and then coming back 5 days later, people telling you that it's all about Wall Street, it's not about Main Street. And we've paid a huge price for a president who could not speak the English language.
Some Americans believe that they feel they're carrying the burden because of this economy. The economy they say is suffering because of this war.
I don't agree with that.
You don't agree with that? It has nothing to do with the economy of the war? The spending on the war?
I think actually the spending on the war might help with jobs. Yeah, because we're buying equipment and people are working. I think this economy is down because we built too many houses.
While President Bush claimed the war has nothing to do with the economy, one of the country's leading economists has just published a book that puts an estimated price tag on the war in Iraq. The number may surprise you, $3 trillion.
What they claim as the cost of the Iraq war in the budget is not the full cost. There are the operational costs that everybody understands, but then there are costs hidden elsewhere in the defense budget. But then there are really some very big costs hidden elsewhere, like contractors that have been the subject of such concern. We pay their insurance through the Labor Department. But the most important cost, the budgetary cost, that we haven't talked about publicly, that haven't been talked about, are the costs of veterans, their disability, veterans, health care, that will total hundreds of billions of dollars over the next decades. Then you go beyond that budgetary cost to the cost of the economy. For instance, when somebody gets disabled, the disability pay is just a fraction of what the loss to their family, to the income that they could have otherwise earned. And then you go beyond that to the macroeconomic cost. The fact that the war has been associated with an increasing price of oil. We're spending money on oil exports, Saudi Arabia, other oil exporting countries. That's money that's not being spent here at home.
You've been looking at what officials have been saying recently and prior to this.
That's right. And over the past couple of weeks, stark and frank language increasingly about what's happening in the capital markets and the economy.
Government action in the
It's about as dire as a president can get on the economy.
We're facing a choice between action and the real prospect of economic hardship for millions of Americans.
This from an administration that for months said the economy was vibrant, the financial system strong. The president didn't acknowledge, quote, storm clouds until last December. By then, it was raining.
There's definitely some storm clouds and concerns, but the underpinning is good. And we'll work our way through this period.
Then, with each disastrous job report or capital market crisis, an upbeat assessment. In January,
our economy is flexible. It is resilient.
In February, the president's surprised by spiking gas prices.
Well, what did you say? You're predicting $4 a gallon gas? That's interesting. I hadn't heard that.
In March, Bear Stearns was in a death spiral, and the Fed brokered its sale.
We're in challenging times, but another thing is for certain that we've taken strong and decisive action.
Our financial institutions are strong. Our investment banks are strong. Our banks are strong. They're going to be strong for many, many years.
In July, IndyMac Bank failed.
I believe we will come through this challenge stronger than ever before.
The three trying to sell this $700 billion rescue didn't see it coming. The Treasury Secretary told NPR last year of the global economy.
It's as strong as I've seen it any time during my business career.
And again last October.
This is happening against the backdrop of an economy that, which in other respects is very solid. So far, there's very little evidence that it's bleeding over into other areas.
As the subprime crisis devolved early last year, the Fed chief.
We do not expect significant spillovers from the subprime market to the rest of the economy or to the financial system.
And now?
This plan is an emergency plan to put out a fire, to resolve a serious crisis which has real Main Street implications.
Slowly, over the last 10 or 11 months, the administration has been acknowledging the problem, always with the caveat that the underlying system is vibrant and flexible and strong.
War, a tragedy for many, but the chance to make a fast buck for an unscrupulous few. The amount of money missing in Iraq and Afghanistan has reached eye-watering levels, and no one is being held to account. RT's Guyan H. Jacan investigates.
They can go after people that steal $43,000 all they want, and that's great. Okay, they should go after them. But what about on the larger scale?
In 2006, Michael O'Brien was tasked with helping build the Iraqi military. He says those who have pocketed millions enjoy complete impunity.
They rebuilt an Iraqi army base, and I'm telling you, the condition of this base, and this is just one example, was so deplorable. It was so pathetic. And when I asked the American construction project manager, well, what did this cost? How much money went into this? I really thought he was going to say $3 million or $5 million. It was $116 million. My jaw dropped.
The Commission on Wartime Contracting estimated that between $31 to $60 billion has been lost to waste and fraud in Iraq and Afghanistan. The figures seem even more staggering considering the overall amount the U.S. has committed to rebuilding Iraq, roughly $62 billion. Peter Van Buren was the head of an Iraq reconstruction team working for the U.S. State Department.
The squandering of resources occurred at very small levels, $1,000, a couple of $1,000 here and there, and zoomed all the way up into hundreds of millions of dollars that were spent on hospitals that never opened or prisons that never took any prisoners in.
The Commission on Wartime Contracting is out of business now after Congress cut its funding. The details of their probe sealed until 2031.
They don't want certain people in high places to come under scrutiny. The U.S. Congress wants to put the debacle of our Iraq invasion behind it.
The scope of the waste and fraud is enormous. The U.S. justice system goes after individuals who have stolen a few $1,000s here and there, but not after the big players, the big contractors that have really made a killing on the wars. I'm Ganesh Chekyan reporting from Washington, RT.
You've heard a lot about Halliburton lately. Criticism is okay. We can take it. Criticism is not failure. We're serving the troops because of what we know, not who we know.
Well, let me tell you about Halliburton, the company I ran. I'm very proud of what I did at Halliburton. The people of Halliburton are very proud of what they've accomplished. And I frankly don't feel any need to apologize for the way I've spent my time over the last 5 years as the CEO and chairman of a major American corporation.